parts of our current moment, and there are many, is watching the American left become the mirror image of what it once was not so long ago. Do you remember when liberals supported free speech and due process, when the ACLU had principles? Remember when they sided with wage earners over billionaires when they kind of cared about you or pretended to? Seems like about 100 years ago. Liberals also, by the way, used to care about the environment, not the politicized abstract stuff like climate policy, but the actual physical environment of America, our land and our water and our trees, even our sidewalks. Liberals were worried about mass immigration and overpopulation then. They didn't want to live in a crowded, dirty country. Well, after a whole lot of searching, we have located the last liberal in America who feels that way. We'll talk to him in just a minute. But first tonight, speaking of liberals, they are thrilled by the Mueller investigation these days. It seems like all upside to them. Their political opponents are being harassed day and night. Some of them may soon be indicted. The administration can barely govern with all the noise about Russia. Now, Robert Mueller is said to be a Republican. They always tell us that. But in effect, Mueller is doing the heavy lifting of the Democratic Party. If you're a progressive who hates Donald Trump, this is like Christmas every single day. Or is it? Writer T.A. Frank has his doubts about that. Frank is no right-winger. He doesn't like Donald Trump, actually. But he's thought this through carefully. In an insightful piece for Vanity Fair, Frank wonders if liberals will look back on this moment and consider the Mueller investigation worth doing. In response to criticism from the left, for example, Frank notes, quote, Trump's White House has pursued what is arguably the harshest set of policies toward Russia since the fall of communism. That's hardly something to celebrate. Yet nearly all of the pressure from the center-left, as much as from the right, is toward making it even tougher on Russia. So the question is it really wise to risk war with a nuclear-armed power solely for short-term partisan political advantage? Is that a precedent you want to set, Frank wonders? And then this, which ought to be printed and taped to the fridge in the kitchen of every political consultant on the Democratic side in Washington. Here it is, quote, the weapons you create for your side today will be used by the other side against you tomorrow. Do we really want the special counsel investigation to become a staple of presidential life? It's a creation with few boundaries on scope and a setup that encourages the selection of a suspect followed by a search for the crime rather than the other way around. Well, that's a good point. Democrats are now telling us that Robert Mueller is somehow above the reach of government. Any executive branch oversight of his investigation qualifies, they tell us, as an impeachable offense. In their view, Mueller is something like a God prosecutor, accountable only to himself. But the question is, will Democrats be comfortable with that standard when the next independent counsel investigates the next Democratic president? And more to the point, whatever happened to representative government? Shouldn't all federal employees answer to elected officials who in turn answer to voters? That's what representative government is. Well, not anymore. In the name of defending democracy, the left is weakening democracy. Democrats don't seem to understand that now. They're having too much fun watching their enemies suffer. But they will understand it, and likely they'll deeply regret it. Robin Biro is a former Obama campaign regional director. He joins us tonight. Robin, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
First to the Russia question, I would never argue that Russia is our friend. I think, they don't seek our best. And I think they've undertaken a lot of mischief at our expense over the years. In the last election, probably one example of it. But the idea that Russia is our primary geopolitical adversary is like insane. It's untrue. That, of course, would be China. No one disagrees with that. And so doesn't this whole investigation amount to, in effect, a lie to the American people about the threats we really face?
You know, Tucker, I look at this from the standpoint, I'm a veteran. Yes. A Spec Ops veteran, and I look at this as protecting our democracy. The sole intent of this was to look at foreign influence in our electoral process. Right. That really shouldn't be a partisan issue. I think that as patriotic Americans, and I think that we both are, and most of the viewers are, I'm sure, we support federal law enforcement and want to make sure that they are not adversely affecting our electoral process.
But I wonder, though, look, like a lot of things, I don't disagree with what you say in theory, but I wonder if we're not undermining democracy in its defense. So here you have a special counsel who Democrats are telling us is not accountable to any branch of government. The executive branch run by Trump can't rein him in because that would be an impeachable offense, and Congress has no authority because he's an executive branch employee, technically. So that's not a democratic system where you have someone with the power to destroy your life and put you in prison who can't be accountable to anybody elected by voters. That's the opposite of democracy, is it not?
You know, I looked at the appointment memo for Robert Mueller in this investigation, and it gives him the authority to look into any matters that may arise directly from the investigation. So that's pretty broad. And to your question about whether or not this could come back on Democrats, yes, it could. I remind you that the Flynn memo that just came out this week pretty much showed us that there are 2 other criminal investigations. Those could very well be against Democrats. Those could come back to haunt us for sure.
Okay,
so yes, the weapons that we use
you're
now
absolutely right,
could
of course,
come back to haunt us.
But may I get to a more fundamental question?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Since you're for democracy, I'm for democracy, then let's just agree on the terms here. Every employee of a government in democracy must answer by definition to an elected official because the voters are in control. The power resides with them, correct?
Yes.
What elected official does Robert Mueller answer to?
I don't know exactly how the DOJ works, but I do support federal law enforcement. Ultimately, the man at the top of the DOJ.
Look, I don't mean to be a stickler on the civics thing,
is President Trump.
As long as we're defending democracy, let's defend democracy. And democracy is predicated on the idea that people rule, and they rule through their elected representatives in our version of democracy. So if he is working for us, if he's a federal employee, which he is, which elected representative can fire him? Which elected representative does he answer to? And the answer from Democrats is, well, none. But that's not democracy, is it? No. That's something else. That's more like, I don't know, monarchy.
Technically, well, if you want to get technical, he answers to President Donald Trump, who is, by technicality, he's head of all of law enforcement. He's our chief law enforcement officer.
By technicality, was he elected?
Would he not then
by
be
voters,
the ultimate person that he would answer to? Donald Trump himself has says that he's had the authority many times to fire him and chose not to for political reasons. I think that was a good move on his part.
Yeah, but maybe it was politically or not. But Democrats are telling us, and I watch the dumb people on TV. It's on in my office all day long, and I do. I can't help it. And I hear them say again and again that Trump cannot fire or rein in a federal employee. He doesn't have the authority to do that. Now, that seems to me, that's a pretty clear argument against democracy. What you're saying is voters have no role in this. Their elected representatives are powerless. They have to sit back and let some guy elected by nobody do whatever he wants. Is that the democracy that we're defending now?
No, and you're correct to point out the hypocrisy of the left, especially on some of the other networks. I watch those networks, too. I get counterpoints. I watch conservative media. I watch the other mainstream networks, and they're not calling out things appropriately. You are correct that President Trump has been tougher on Russia than any other post-war president, or post-Cold War president. That is correct. I fact-checked that with NPR because that's a trusted source. But I don't see that coming. I don't see that. I don't see that coming from mainstream media, other mainstream media.
Again, a 30,000-foot question here. So we've been tougher on Russia. We're also closer to war with Russia than we've been at any time, probably since the Cuban Missile Crisis. How are we safer for that? Does that make you feel safer? It doesn't make me feel safer.
As far as protecting our democracy and protecting against cyber warfare, it's a real problem in this day and age. And we saw all of those intelligence agencies, the U.S. intelligence agencies, come out clearly and say that this was a problem. This actually did happen. President Trump has kind of been waffling on whether or not he believes U.S. intelligence, but you know, it's a problem, and we are better for looking into this because it protects our democracy, which again I say is a nonpartisan issue. As
I feel it's been
we should all
but
want to protect our democracy.
Robin, thank you very much.
It's time for the left to fold up their fantasy tents. If they hate Donald Trump so much, maybe they should focus on winning the 2020 presidential election instead of this Russia collusion, delusion nonsense that's been wasting our time, our money, and dividing our nation for the past 2 years. The nonstop personal vendetta against the president by Mueller and his rabid team of Trump-hating prosecutors, breathlessly reported by the Trump-hating media at every turn, is so intense that they proudly beat their leftist chests every time they issue an indictment against someone, anyone, most of whom are living in Russia and will never be brought to justice here or anywhere else for that matter. or have been indicted for events that preceded Trump, or for lying to the FBI, which we later find out wasn't even considered a lie by the FBI agents, or is so serious that one guy got a whopping 14 days in jail. Bottom line, none of the indictments the special counsel has brought has tied the president to Russia. So did the president direct a felony? If Michael Cohen, who is probably one of the most flawed prosecution witnesses I've ever seen, and that's saying something, is relied upon to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump circumvented campaign finance laws, they might just as well be whistling Dixie up the Mississippi. Permit me. Number one, if the president directed any payment, why? What was his state of mind? What was he thinking? What wasn't he thinking? Do you really think Michael Cohen knows? Maybe he didn't want his wife to find out. Maybe he didn't want his family to find out. Maybe he was trying to prevent any tarnish on his brand. Or maybe to simply get the woman off his back. It wouldn't be the first time a high-profile person paid to get rid of a nuisance lawsuit. Now, there is a presumption of innocence in every criminal case and every criminal investigation, and never a presumption against that without evidence that acts are done for purely criminal reasons. And don't forget, it was citizen Donald Trump's money that was used and not campaign money for whatever might have occurred before he was president, unlike another president impeached for acts that occurred with a young intern in the Oval Office while he was president. And so far, 30 million taxpayer dollars for this nonsense. It's nonsense, especially because Barack Obama was in a position to actually do something about so-called Russian interference, but did nothing except to tell Putin to knock it off. And even that I don't believe. And as for the testimony of holier-than-thou Cardinal James Comey, the grandstanding political operative who believes the rules don't apply to him and who fought so hard to testify in an open setting, I'm left with only one thought. Jim, why the hell did you want your testimony before House and Judiciary and Oversight Committees to be in public? Jim, you readily admitted almost 250 times that you didn't recall or didn't remember. Honestly, it would have been and is less embarrassing for you to do it behind closed doors. But Slippery Jim says he doesn't remember important facts about the most important FISA case in American history that required his approval. He states it doesn't matter where the fake dossier came from. Yet, he still has total confidence in the FISA process that he corrupted. Now, I don't have to go over this again. Comey's been found by the Inspector General to have mishandled the Clinton email investigation, to have lied before Congress, not about exonerating Hillary, before the investigation was done, and to be an admitted leaker of sensitive information that he wanted to get to the New York Times through his friend. And when asked if he would have fired the lovers on his staff, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who openly communicated their hatred and disdain for candidate Donald Trump, yet all the while investigating him, Comey states he can't answer in the abstract. He doesn't deny he would have allowed them to stay on the Clinton investigation in spite of their hate, as long as they gave an explanation. No surprise, Jim, since you're a pal of the Clintons. But most shocking is Comey's role in the theater of the absurd. A fake dossier paid for by a woman who's his friend running for president. And he's best friends with the special counsel in charge of the case. And he doesn't remember key details like the party who funded it. in the most blatant display of public corruption and personal political cover in American history. Shame on you, Jim.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.